Hello everybody, it's Legion, and once again we are doing a report card video. Today we are going to be talking about the Republic's Core. So once again, this is how I grade units. Both of these slides, feel free to pause and check them out. Alright, so we don't have a lot to talk about this week, but we are going to go into great detail over both of the Republic options because I think they have a lot of versatility and a lot of options. So we'll start off with the Phase 1s coming in at 52 points. They have fire support. That's it. 1 health, 1 courage, and red saves through range 3 on the black dice and black and melee. Fire support, it's a great keyword. It's a very unique keyword, and considering it's not on things like mortars or MK2s, it's just on your units. It offers so many different dice pools in this faction just because these guys exist. So fire support in general is amazing. The only downside to it is you kind of got to get in range 3 to usually get all of your dice into play, but there's even moments when you can just argue a range 4 fire support. But they have lots of upgrades, and thankfully one of the things we're going to talk about is when the errata came, the only faction / unit that was really affected by it was the Clone Troopers, because all of their upgrades essentially got nerfed by 4 or 5 points, which is really good. Unfortunately, the base cost of these guys is still high. Nonetheless, though, they are an elite unit. They have token sharing, so you can share 1 token, any green tokens, not standbys, with another unit or another Clone Trooper unit at range 1. They also have red saves, and in the cover always economy that we have, red saves are very, very valuable. They do very well when they're behind cover compared to white saves, obviously. But some cons is their courage 1 and range 3 is usually where they want to be. So they have very little in terms of range 4 plink damage. They definitely do have some. We'll talk about the sniper gun they have as well and how much cheaper it is. But for the most part, coming to range 3, minigun, fire support into something like a Barg, awesome. You get a giant dice pool, but that can also be bad because that usually means you're moving towards them, and when you're courage 1, sometimes you don't get a second action, which can be bad. They're very pricey for a corpse unit. That's going to be the main downside of the Republic forces, is that we are looking at more expensive, more elite units in the corpse slot, which means that there's not a lot of cheap options that this faction has to offer, which isn't the worst thing in the world, and we'll talk about that. But let's talk about some of their upgrades. They have 4 really well-diversed weapons. DC 15, range 4, 2 red dice and critical 1 at 24 points now. This was one of those things that got points reduction, and I think that that is a great price for this weapon and something that you can very much so justify bringing if you do want to try and get in more of a range 4 shootout. It's not the best though, because you are mostly looking for that critical, which can be kind of tough when you don't get any value out of a, core unit that already costs 52 points, slap on another 24, and you don't even get a dice through. That could be bad. But nonetheless, still something to consider if you are looking to run a more range 4 characteristic Republic army. And thankfully they can share tokens, and they can use different things to increase the chances of you getting that critical one. And then we have the DP 23 Phase 1 Trooper. I really don't think this guy's that bad. I just think the dice pool is a little lackluster for having to come into range 2. Pierce 1's nice though. That's something this faction is missing a lot of, is Pierce. So this is one way to do that. I just don't think there's a lot of times that you're going to be able to effectively get a Clone Trooper unit with Courage 1 into range 2 without, losing troopers or just being suppressed half the game, whatever the situation is. Nonetheless, though, it's only 20 points, so even when you're not, an extra black dice for 20 isn't the worst thing ever, but this would probably be the heavy that I avoid the most. RPS, great. Range 2 to 4, Rainbow. Cumbersome, which sucks, but it's a little bit better now, and I would say this is one of the units that needed that change more so than any other, in terms of being able to move after shooting. And then Impact 2, that's also something the clones desperately need. The more keywords, the better. 21 points, I think this is a mighty fine upgrade, especially with the current surgence of Dark Troopers and how they are kind of seeping into the meta. I think that this is a great option for clone players right now. And it just always seems like there's one in my list, just in case I do run into armor, to fire support into things that can also hurt armor. Then we have the Z6, now 22 points. 6 white dice, range 3. This is the fire support king for sure. especially when you're throwing it into things that search to hit or search to crit, where you just have a bunch of tokens to make it work. I will say that a lot of times I see clone players use this guy, and they're like, oh, look at all these dice, and then they get like 3 hits. I couldn't tell you the top bracket, or the average rather, for these guys without fire supporting or aims or anything, but it's like 2.5 dice. The dice pool of these dudes aren't crazy effective, but that's kind of why the fire support plays a key part in it. And I love fire supporting a C6 with a Bark into, some Rebel Veterans or something like that, and just wiping a whole unit off the board. So, still an amazing heavy, and I would say probably the standard for Phase 1 troopers. They do also have some unique specialist upgrades. They have the Clone Captain at 12 points, which you can tap, and pretty much a suppression thing. Can't remove it, can't be suppressed either though. You do also get the training slot upgrade, which used to be good, and now I don't really know what you would do with it. When you could share like standbys with Anakin and Padme, cool, but I don't know anymore. The ability's still fine. Or you could just, go a point cheaper and get a free aim or dodge and a gear slot upgrade, which is whatever. But this is actually a really good upgrade, especially when you compare it to the Clone Trooper. Once again, I don't know why all of the specialists are 1 point more expensive than just a generic trooper, but I don't know why you would ever not just take them instead of the trooper. So yeah, but getting an aim or dodge or a surge token on a faction that can share tokens, yes, very good upgrade. One that I think you will see a decent amount if it weren't for another upgrade we're going to talk about. Talk about the Phase 2s. I give them a B instead of a B+, coming in at 60 points. We'll talk about that. They have fire support and reliable 1 courage, 1 health, 2 courage, black dice at range 3, and black dice in melee. Once again, fire support, don't need to go over that again. Surge token is way more valuable than you would think. Defense, offense, the regular generic clone troopers need it in all aspects. So the more tokens you can get in the clone army, the better. That's usually what I see in terms of successful clone armies, is how many green tokens do I have on the table. And troopers are no exception. So token sharing, huge for them, as they already start with 1. Courage 2 as well, I think this is very important, and probably the main reason these guys are a little bit better now, in terms of getting a small points reduction. Just Courage 2, they act as a really good front and center piece to be able to close the distance, to get into range 3, to set up fire supports, to be sharing that reliable 1 almost every turn, guaranteed. And be able to take more of a hit because they do have that natural surge token, and they're not worried about suppression as much. So they can very much so feel like a frontline unit that can get into range 3 with their Z6 and set up a fire support. More so than things like Phase 1s. Cons, they are expensive, especially once you put on a heavy and get really expensive, and I think it makes them a big target for things like Pierce. Whenever I'm playing Bossk, Bounty Hunter, Snipers, whatever, it's like, hey, I'm going to aim shoot your Phase 2s. That's how I feel. I feel like it makes them a big target, especially for a corpse unit. I feel like that can be a bit of a deterrence for me in terms of bringing them, but I do think with some of these upgrades we're going to look at, they're actually really good. So, for the most part, I think that Phase 2s definitely have a place. My biggest thing for them, and the reason they get a B, is I really don't think you bring more than 1, unless you're playing something like 501st, but that's a completely different thing. In terms of just the generic Republic Army, I think you can absolutely start fitting one of these guys into most of your lists, due to things like passing. I think 9 activations is much more reasonable for GAR players in the game of Star Wars Legion right now. But I still think you kind of stick to maybe 1 unit of Phase 2s, if that. A lot of my lists have 1 unit of Phase 2s. So unfortunately, I think they're good, and arguably you could make their grade a little bit higher. But in terms of their pricing, you really have a hard time justifying more than 1, in my opinion. But nonetheless, I think that even the 2 points helps them a lot in terms of getting them on the table. They also have some interesting upgrades. Only 2 heavy weapons. One is the mortar, one is the Z6. The mortar for 18 points I think is a really interesting choice, offering you another way to do range 4 plink damage while also being suppressive. I think that's very good. It's just you are paying a premium for a trooper at range 4, so it's almost more arguable to get him into range 3 and just decimate something. The Z6 is 27 points, and this is probably my biggest deterrence for playing this unit, is that that's a pretty big asking price in terms of a core unit to whip this on, and then probably something like a medic as well to kind of flesh out the unit and make them super elite. You're looking at like 110 points, I think. So these guys can become a big target quickly. And unfortunately, we're talking about a faction where there really aren't any cheap units. So if we're starting to make our corps some of the most expensive things in our army, it's going to be hard to flesh out something with 9 activations that isn't looking at, naked phase 1s or things that just don't have weapons. But we have Barks. Then you have the generic phase 2 trooper. Unfortunately, you can't put the specialist or anything like that onto the phase 2s, which I think would be awesome, but yes, obviously for balancing reasons. 13 points is fine. I just think that you could pay 2 points more and get this other upgrade we're going to talk about. Yes, here we go. All these guys got point changes, which is great. These is easily the most eroded stuff, is these upgrades for the weapons, the specialists, all got cheaper, and while it didn't necessarily make the base costs, besides the 2 points on the phase 2s, any cheaper for the core units of GAR, it did give them a lot more diversity in terms of, wow, I might actually be able to afford something like a medic, or maybe I'm going to play Cody and have a piece of armor, I can bring a clone engineer. So those are really great in terms of allowing more diversity in your clone list. But you have the Clone Commander, Inspire 1, and Reliable 1, which I think is really good. Unfortunately, he doesn't increase your courage, which I think is a bit odd, but getting Inspire 1 and Reliable 1 on a unit is pretty good. 18 points though, bit of an asking price, but nonetheless, still a pretty good upgrade. Comstech for 11 points, not too shabby. It's just, unfortunately, you have to equip the comm slot, which, I mean, HQ uplink on clones is pretty cool, but I think that's way too much of an asking price for, once again, an army and a corpse setup that is already expensive enough as is. Clone Engineer for 14 points, that's pretty cheap. It's pretty cheap for a body to essentially be 1 point more expensive than a phase 2 extra trooper, and 3 points more than the phase 1, and have repair 1 capacity 1. Yes, it's a very good upgrade. Unfortunately, it is completely outclassed by this last one, which I think is easily the bright star, the shining star, whatever you want to call it for GAR players right now, is the Clone Medic. Being able to bring back one of those elite troopers, or even heal your commander, give Anakin another wound, anything like that is awesome. For 15 points, it's a great upgrade. This is easily, in my opinion, the best thing the Republic got, besides maybe the DC 15 upgrade. I think that this is really strong. I think this is probably what justifies bringing a phase 2 more so than anything else, is popping one of these guys in a phase 2 unit with the Z6 and, having a way to heal back a trooper that they lost, or heal up a phase 1 behind them, or your Yoda next to you that accidentally blanked one of his dice. Like, there's just a lot of things that love getting healed up in the Republic Army. Because you have less models, because you have more elite units, every time you bring one back, that impact is so much more. And more importantly, for 15 points, you have an extra body. It's an extra black dice and an extra red dice on defense, one more unit they have to chip through. So I think this is a great upgrade. I think it is going to be seen in a lot of Republic lists, and for 15 points, that kind of feels like a steal almost. But nonetheless, we have our 2 buddies from a ARC Trooper box that can go into phase 1s or phase 2s. So Echo, I don't think I would ever recommend putting him in a phase 1 unit just because of the courage value. Reliable 1, critical 1, lethal 1, all great things, but the fact that that unit is, probably going to be the first thing I ever look at suppressing, because you have 42 points sitting behind a phase 1 unit that if I can suppress them, he's losing a lot of value. I think that's rough. So I wouldn't recommend that. In a phase 2 unit, I think it actually makes sense. Reliable 2, maybe a bit overkill, but nonetheless, I think it's a pretty cool unit. I don't think he necessarily needs to be in a phase 1 or phase 2 unit. I think he's fine as just a sniper. Fives, on the other hand, Fives is a beast, a almost auto include in most of my lists that are looking to fire support. I always put him in a phase 1 unit, not a phase 2 unit, because I love having another unit that is essentially courage 2, because he increases courage by 1. And then he also gets his coordinate clone trooper, which is huge. Every time he gets an order, he can choose another clone trooper unit at range 1 and give them an order as well. So a lot of potential there. I think with things like Cody coming out, he is going to resurge. I mean, he's already still very popular, but he is super expensive. Both of these guys are super expensive, and it's tough, but they're both 2 health apiece. They both have good guns. I think Fives is going to come out quite a bit in terms of the Cody Surgeons, and we'll see some cool fire supporting lists with him. But he's still good right now, absolutely. So if you like Fives, I think he's a great upgrade. But I do recommend putting him in a Phase 1 unit. I see a lot of people put him in Phase 2 units, and Courage 3 is nice, but getting another Phase, or another core unit to Courage 2 is even better in my opinion. So, great upgrade. Summary. Fire support, fire support, fire support. Okay, super unique keyword, allows for so much diversity in terms of taking down big targets really efficiently. Okay, fire support's great. I think it's going to be seen at a more widespread level and a more elite level when Cody comes out, but we'll talk more about that in a second. They are the elite corps. Unfortunately, you're not, even when you just run clones and you run cheaper units, you run 3 barks, you're still probably not going to have as many models as some other players that are running things that are just cheaper. But remember that your units are essentially more elite. They can share tokens, they can fire support, they can do everything. They do a lot of cool stuff, and they can easily wipe out full units. In other words, Phase 1's fire supporting into a bark can kill Vader. Can is the keyword. More importantly though, Vader can easily wipe out a Phase 1 unit. So the elite corps thing goes both ways. If you roll bad, it feels worse on this faction than any other faction. So I love Republic, I love the aesthetic, but this is probably my least enticing reason to play them at times. Is I just, I've got 5 search tokens out here, 2 dodges, let me roll my dice, and it's 4 blanks. It feels so much worse in this faction than any other faction out there. So it's definitely something to consider. Every unit means so much more to you. It's like watching the Clone Wars and they name a clone and then kill him 2 episodes later. That is the Republic GAR experience when we're talking about the core units. Okay, most changes from the errata though. The errata really didn't have a lot of changes, kind of disappointing, but for clone players, not so much disappointing. Nothing crazy in terms of shifting the meta or anything like that, but getting things like those medics and the DC-15 for a couple points cheaper, and even the minigun for 1 point cheaper, Phase 2s for 2 points cheaper, all that stuff. Really good. And it essentially allows you to be a little more flexible with your list building, especially when we're talking about these corps units. So, positive, right? Expensive though, these guys are all expensive. There's limited options and there's not cheaper options. So all big points for me. You can do Phase 1s, you can do Phase 2s, that's it. Move about your day. And you got to bring 3 of one or the other. So kind of a good bad thing. I think they could do a lot of different things in terms of doing like clone cadets for cheaper, and then they could just start, putting money in their pockets by selling you the different divisions, like, oh, here's the 501st clones, here's the 212th, here's the airborne drops, here's the scout troopers, here's the Kashyyyk defender. Like, they could make so many different models for the different clones, and I think they should, because I think that this is easily the most popular faction in terms of people like clone troopers. So the more you give them, the more options they have, I think would be very cool. But I think that's easily one of the downsides of this, is like, yeah, you can paint them up, make them look cool however you want, but there's still only 2 options. And you're probably not going to be running a ton of the Phase 2s, right? So, stinks, but I think you could easily do stuff like Obi-Wan's 212th, I believe, his brigade or whatever. You could do something unique. Instead of those Phase 2s being reliable 1, maybe they're independent dodge. So that way there's a trade-off for like giving them an order for fire support, or you can get a dodge. Might be too good, I'm not a game balancer, but just stuff like that to add some variety to the faction would be huge. And you don't even necessarily have to release a new unit. You could just say, hey, if like you run them as this, this, or this, you get something. And please avoid the paint schemes as the like way that you determine what you're running. But nonetheless, bright future. I don't know. I think Cody is really going to bring back the fire supporting, the true power of the Phase 1s and Phase 2s. So if you're looking at these corps, I think they are really good. I just don't think we've seen them at their fullest potential. You maybe see a couple fire supports in some of the most elite Republic games, just because that's not really the way Republic wins right now. But with Cody, you may be just seeing things come off the table. I could be overestimating his ability for sure, but I think that that's definitely what he's going to focus on, is fire supporting. So if you like these 2 core units and you want to use them for kind of what they were meant for, it might be your time. It might be your time, GAR players. Cody may be bringing the Rex Star back in at least some facet. Maybe not as drastic as that, but it will be there as an option, which I think will be fun. And I think it's definitely something that I'm going to explore and play with. They always manage to find success. This has honestly been one of the bigger downsides of Republic for most people, is like, oh, I gotta bring 3 core troopers, and they don't, they cost too much, they get shot up, whatever. They still find success. Gar players have been winning even before this errata, and I think this errata just makes the corpse units a little bit better. Once again, wish they had cheaper options, but they don't, which is fine. I think that they're in a good spot as a faction. I think that I will give credit to AMG in this. I think they did a really good job giving some changes to Gar to make their units a little bit more diverse and a little bit better without necessarily making them OP. Because before this, Gar was easily on top and the clones were super OP, so I really don't want to return to that state of the Star Wars Legion, but nonetheless, I think AMG did a good job giving them some reprieve from those previous nerfs while also keeping them down to earth. So shout out there, because I think they did probably the best job balancing the clone troopers in particular. So exciting future. I think Cody's gonna bring these guys out and show you the full potential, but nonetheless, Gar cores are good. So you guys keep leaving criticism, keep leaving critiques. I should be on some videos with Jerry's Games Workshop as well. He's got a great channel. You guys should go check him out. Go check out his videos. He makes great quality production. Should be having some quality of life improvements to these videos soon. But nonetheless, hope you guys enjoy. Feel free to talk in the comments about anything. Ask me any questions in terms of your list building, what I think about units, success. I love to chat with you guys. So feel free to drop whatever questions you have in the comments, and we can chat it up. You guys have a good one.